Welcome back to the Rollup YouTube channel. We got Jesse from Hashport on today, and we're talking all about Hedera, Hashport, and Web3 trends and lots of blockchain stuff going on just at the enterprise level and the DGen level as well. So welcome to the channel, Jesse, and we can keep it rolling, buddy.
Yeah, pleasure to be here. Wherever you'd like to start.
Yeah. So you were mentioning how, Hedera is actually a little bit underknown as like one of the more used blockchains out there. And we were talking how it's a bit about like an awareness problem, just because we haven't really seen some of the applications that are being built on there, probably because they're a little bit more oriented towards enterprise. And you mentioned one application on Hedera that's actually, it's got some significant volume.
Yeah.
Maybe you could just kind of pick up on that protocol.
Yeah, absolutely. I think, with Hedera, there are quite a few things that sort of have flown under the radar with respect to people in the space really knowing about. For one, while it does have blockchain components to it and acts like a decentralized network, just like any other, it's actually a different structure altogether than a blockchain. Something called a directed acyclic graph.
Yeah.
And so that structure actually, and there are other networks that are based off a DAG protocol. Not all DAGs are created in the same manner. There's some differentiation there. But one of the things that came out of the Hashgraph algorithm that Dr. Baird solved for was, how do you have a network at scale that is as secure as possible while maintaining its performance and fairness? And so there's quite a few things that are unique to the Hedera network that are just now starting to really make their way more into the mainstream. So fairness of ordering is such a big thing. I think as you get use cases, especially enterprise ones at scale, you're going to need that, I think, over time with use cases that have significant, value to them. So the algorithm actually solves for fairness of ordering. So there's no front running or MEV attacks or anything like that on Hedera. It's very, very, very fair. The other thing with the network and the algorithm is transactions settle on the network with 100% finality. So you don't have any situation where it's probabilistic finality, where you're waiting for X number of block confirmations to know that your transaction has gone through. It's literally once the transaction has been registered on the network, it is 100% immutable and unchangeable. And then before I just jump back into your question about the use cases, two other really critical components, actually probably three. The network itself is super efficient. So it's actually, from an energy perspective, I think the University College of London actually did a study where they showed that Hedera's network is actually the greenest network in the world by a significant margin. And so when you're thinking about all the things in the media about ESG or energy inefficiencies of networks, obviously those things are being worked on with other networks, as well as L2s and scaling solutions. But from a native base layer, Hedera basically takes the cake when it comes to energy compliance while maintaining those security and fairness properties. The last thing I'll sort of touch on is the idea that they've really focused on building this from the ground up to cater to large use cases at scale. So the transactions and the fees on the network are pegged to USD value. So it doesn't matter what the underlying token of the network HBAR goes to, essentially. A given transaction type will have the exact same cost as whether the price was X or Y. So over time, even if the value of the network grows and the token value grows with it, you can plan as a business and know that, say a budget of $10,000 is going to get you the exact same number of transactions as it did the first day that you started building on the network. And that's really important as a business. You need to know if you're budgeting for a use case that you're going to actually be able to do that. So all of those things wrapped together goes sort of back to some of the use cases that are being developed. And it is true there's quite a few use cases being developed, but one that's actually live right now is called atma.io. And that use case has been out now since around the beginning of the year. But from that use case, as well as several others, but that use case in particular, it has provided transactional volume that is putting Hedera at the top of the list when it comes to transactional volume. So, on any given day, it's running between 300 to 800, sometimes almost 1,000 transactions a second on the network from that individual use case. And so when we look at activity, real world activity, and at scale, Hedera is really leading the way in that. And I think over time, that's only going to grow, especially as more and more use cases start deploying on the network and running these novel, protocols that are going to enable real world things to happen. So that platform, Atma.io, is, I believe, sort of a product lifecycle track and trace. So I think they're onboarding something like 20 billion items, of which, throughout their life cycle, those items could have anywhere from 1 to up to 20 touch points through the product lifecycle. So you're looking at, from one use case potentially, and just as I believe as a proof of concept, to start, 400 billion potentially transactions running through the network. So it's exciting. I mean, it's stuff that I think the spaces really strive towards, to deliver on the promise of decentralized ledgers and what that means. And so as Hashport, as the bridge that connects, Hedera to the broader EVM world, right now we actually connect to 8 other chains. We just connected today actually to Phantom and Chronos to go along with Ethereum, Optimism, Arbitrum, BNB chain, Polygon, and Avalanche. And so, just being able, like, Web3 is just about interconnectedness, right? And being able to leverage novel technologies to solve use cases, difficult use cases. And I think, as time goes on and as the ecosystem becomes more and more cohesive, I think people are really going to find a lot to like within the Hedera ecosystem.
Yeah, it has the scalability of a blockchain that like we've all kind of like knew was coming, but haven't really seen in practice.
Yeah.
And we had a conversation with the co-founder of Connects just the other day on this channel, and he described why we aren't seeing some non-financial applications and use cases where like a lot of the promise of blockchain was, it was guided towards supply chain, it was guided towards governance, gaming, a lot of applications and use cases that weren't specific for financial use cases. But because of the limited scalability of blockchains, we've only been limited to applications to speculate on certain financial products. So through the development and through scaling blockchains, it kind of unveils like all of these other applications that are possible with blockchain technology, and people would like to use blockchain to deploy these non-financial applications, but they're limited by scale. And Hedera has built with scale in mind, because they're building for enterprise solutions that have the technical know-how and the reach to deploy these non-financial types of applications. So I'm hoping that Hedera, and it sounds like their most popular application right now is non-financial, which is particularly interesting, as we start to like kind of incorporate those other types of applications onto blockchain, how those applications will kind of pick their chain. Because now it's not so much like, well, where can we get like the highest incentives, or where should we deploy this application to kind of harness the most community? The solution is almost primarily for solving that scalability trilemma. And Hedera has done so with the DAG, which I remember was like kind of a meme back in like 2017, 2018, when the Ethereum killers were all the rage. Cardano was getting, and I think the main DAG was IOTA back then. And they had just some like critical problems like early on that didn't even, the chain just didn't work, or the ledger didn't work. So I have not heard about like DAG technology since like 2018. But it's cool to hear about it working in practice and actually solving for those scalability problems that are faced by like these non-traditional applications. And my understanding of DAGs, if we could get into it, is like it's almost like a 3D chain where it like a chain is almost like 2D. It's like kind of just linear. But my understanding of a DAG is it's the dynamic acrylic graph. So it's kind of like if you have a chain, right? It's just kind of like an x-axis that follows just time, and it's just a chain of transactions. But somehow a DAG is able to like scale both on the x and the y and kind of like map all of the transactions on multiple dimensions than just like an x-axis that maps them chronologically. So is that like the kind of one way to understand a DAG? And I guess why has, I guess my question is like, why aren't more blockchains exploring DAG technology?
Good, all good questions. I think from the I'm gonna just there was a lot to unpack there, so I'm gonna grab onto a few things. I think transactional volume that has to do with finance, with respect to distributed ledgers, is ultimately going to be such a small fraction of what is logged on a day-to-day basis. I think we're right now in the throes of going through the same thing as what happened with the internet revolution, in the sense that you know you and I are conversing right now on these devices, and we're using Zoom, but you might be on some entirely different piece of technology than I am. It still works just the same. We're getting the exact same experience. The utility of it ultimately bears out for both of us in this interaction. And so I think that that's sort of the same thing that's going to come about with DLTs. Is you might have a very large contingent of the population that doesn't even understand that what is undergirding what they're using, or the utility or value of a service that they're getting, is underpinned by blockchain technology, or DLTs or DAGs. And so I think, we're just in that infancy stage still. We're 13 years in, and we're still just starting to explore the functionalities, let alone, with AI and everything that seems to be coming along now. All of that is going to interplay over the coming decades to create some, very interesting things that we haven't ever seen before. In terms of Hedera as an ecosystem, it's developing and growing a healthy DeFi ecosystem, just like most of the other networks. I think there's around 3 or 4 DEXs that are live right now. I think Saucer Swap, PeliSwap, Pangolin Exchange, and a few others, and as well as NFT marketplaces and a burgeoning ecosystem for that. So I think a lot of that is coming along, and it's sort of part and parcel with people learning about, oh, there is an ecosystem here, that is similar to the ones that we're currently on. But to get back to your point about DAGs, the way it works, at least with Hedera, there's a property called Gossip about Gossip. It's a very interesting property in the sense that it leverages something called virtual voting. So what ends up happening is there are 2 tiny little bite-sized messages that get put inside of each transaction that's submitted to the network. One that houses what that node just recently got from the last transaction, or from the last log transaction on the network, and one of what they're doing currently with their existing transaction. And by doing that and sharing those things inside of each transaction on the network, all of the nodes can infer basically what each other would have voted had they actually taken like a physical actual vote. So through a bunch of very, very beautiful math, essentially, you can arrive at the conclusion without ever having to have done any of the actual heavy lifting, which means it's incredibly lightweight. And as a result, you get that scalability of the transactional volume. With a DAG structure, and particularly with Hashgraph, is it's something called asynchronous Byzantine fault tolerant. So that, and I know that's a term and a half, but Basically, think of it as like bank grade security, or the best type of security property you can have at scale for a distributed ledger. And I believe Hedera is one of the only, if not the only, networks in existence that has this property. So when again, when you look at all these factors as a whole, especially if you're an organization looking to come into Web3 at scale and do stuff, um, the network ticks off pretty much all of the boxes you could want with respect to building out a robust implementation for a next level application. So it's very exciting. I mean, we get to see a lot of the use cases being developed behind the scenes. Very, very, very promising. And I mean, over time, I just think that there's so much cross collaboration that's going to happen between ecosystems. Other networks could very well potentially eventually leverage Hedera as a consensus mechanism itself. The Hedera consensus service lends itself to private permission blockchains or ledgers, literally tapping into the public distributed trust of the network to be able to gain that functional trust to what they're doing. One of the other things that the network really um, a lot of times takes flack for, which I would just tend to disagree, is the governing council. A lot of times, you'll hear that, oh, it's just a corporate chain, or it's just a bunch of big companies. However, when you really break it down and you look at it, because Hedera's taken a painstaking efforts to decentralize this network. So right now, I think there's about 28 out of a eventual 39 member governing council, comprised of industry leading organizations, like Google, IBM, Dell Technologies. Across the board, there's a who's who, but they really are decentralized in the stake that they hold, the geographic location that they're in. They've even gone so far as to, industry obviously is all decentralized as well. So it's not, there's no lumping in of just any one set of industry. But they've even gone to the painstaking effort of making sure that the infrastructure, like the actual technological hardware that's being run, these nodes are being run on, they don't have very much overlap. So either these orgs are running it internally to themselves, or one or two might be running on GCP, Azure, Amazon Web Services, etc. So that it really has been provided with quite robust decentralization out of the box. And when these organizations are looking at building out on a decentralized network, if they see a lot of orgs that are doing the same in kind, it just lends to the growth and proliferation of that. And not to mention, I mean, over time, there's going to be trusted community nodes that get rolled out, I believe, this year, and then eventually fully anonymous, decentralized nodes that anyone could spin up and run. They've just taken a very pragmatic approach to how they've went about decentralizing. So you basically have an entire chronological history of how Hedera has gone about decentralizing the network. Whereas a lot of other networks, you really don't know who's behind which accounts, or whether they actually well and truly are decentralized. I won't go into that debate here, but I think it's been very valuable for them, and I think it will only serve over time as more and more businesses and organizations look to get into the space, and they really start paying attention to what matters, which is are these networks actually secure and decentralized? Are they doing what we need them to do? That stuff's going to become more and more imperative, I think, as time goes on.
Yeah. One comment on the decentralization of some of the other networks out there. I mean, you can even look at Bitcoin and say the mining companies, there's maybe 2 or 3 that own like over 50% of the hashing power, which is scary for Bitcoin. But they've gone back and forth. I mean, like early on, it was super decentralized, and it's actually been trending towards more centralized. Whereas other chains have kind of like taken alternate paths. Some have started centralized and gone more decentralized, and it sounds like Hedera is trending in the right direction. And over time, they're letting more permissionlessness into their ledger and as a node operator, which I think we've seen play out over the industry in the past where Bitcoin is kind of like a lone wolf in the sense that it started so decentralized, because we've seen all these other networks start off very centralized to bootstrap the growth of the network and then decentralize over time. But some of them just don't do it as smoothly as I think we would like.
It's such a varied problem. There's no right answer to this. The question of what is decentralized enough or what is insufficient for decentralization, what level of functional trust do we ultimately need to run use cases at scale that we have a, fairly certain probability that nothing nefarious is going to happen. And depending on, how stringent a use case or how valuable it is, might necessitate the need for even more stringent, requirements when it comes to decentralization. But I mean, it's just never has there been this many real world studies or tests happening at scale at the same time. It's very fascinating to watch it all unfold every day, and to see this stuff, because it really is just all feedback ultimately to iterate and grow upon. It's very exciting.
Yeah, and it sounds like Hedera has taken learnings from like other networks in the industry where they are not reactive to certain problems after they happen. They're taking very preemptive approaches to decentralize their technology, like making sure that all their servers, their node operators, are in kind of a distributed geographical region to prevent against like a natural disaster taking out a significant portion of the stake. So I mean, they're really approaching it from like a very secure point of view, and they're also able to balance a scalable ledger by concentrating staking within these 28, 30 node operators, and then kind of adding incrementally more decentralization from that council. So I mean, I think it's just almost like a no-brainer. Like Hedera just has like the potential to really serve like a significant portion of distributed technology. But like you mentioned before, I think we hit record, like they just aren't getting the awareness from community-driven approaches to build on the applications. I'm curious why you think that's the case.
Yeah, I think it's a couple things. Obviously, whenever you have several other networks that have first mover advantage and are the predominant way of doing things, and you have a very new and novel technology, it takes some time to permeate the consciousness of the existing prevailing sentiment. Essentially, it's the same way that it was a slow and gradual spiral upward for Bitcoin and then Ethereum, and then these networks slowly, I should say, every successive generation of networks seems to get on faster and faster with the adoption. Obviously, I'm not saying that no one knows about it, but just in terms of the broad scale testing and implementation and working with the network itself and having a wellspring of devs suddenly be like, oh my god, this is incredible, like I didn't even know this was there. That's really sort of what I'm talking about, is the awareness level just needs to rise to meet the technical prowess of the network to really see some fireworks, I think, and some very cool things come out of it, because that's ultimately what it's going to take. Like, Atma.io, it's a great use case, but what happens when there's 10, 15, 20 of those running at scale on the network, and suddenly you're getting transactional volumes that are not in the hundreds but in the thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, like consistently. Like, that's an entirely different conversation, and I believe will lead to people really pausing for a minute and saying, hey, like, look at what's happening here. Let's go check this out. I think who knows when it'll happen, but I just feel like it's a matter of when, not if.
It would spike gas on these other chains, and they just wouldn't be able to handle that type of throughput.
No.
Right. But Hedera has built their ledger in a way that it can support it.
So
And
the network can shard too. So once a given shard fills up, it can just simply spin up a secondary shard in a different region and basically scale linearly. So
right.
you could ultimately, at scale, if you had hundreds, thousands of use cases running in different locales, you could be run like globally, you could be running millions of transactions a second.
Yeah. Yeah. And the support for that amount of throughput, it, like you said, it's a matter of when, because these other chains ultimately run out of block space. And then there's also kind of like the accessibility, where kind of the features that it sounds like Hedera is building out now are opening doors for developers to kind of port over into Hedera through the EVM equivalency that you mentioned. They now have access. Once they hear about it, maybe they didn't want to abandon Solidity or some of the tools that they were familiar with working on at these existing chains. So with EVM equivalency, they're able to just one click port over their contracts and go over to Hedera.
That
The
should be the case, yeah, eventually. Yep.
the other thing I'd like to touch on, kind of like as we wind down, is what the incentives look like for someone. Obviously a forward thinking developer may see Hedera as a flourishing ecosystem and see how an application reaching scale can ultimately has to live on something like Hedera. But is there a sense of urgency for these developers to kind of migrate over for some sort of incentive or like an early mover type of opportunity that's on there at Hedera?
Yeah, I think there's several foundations and grant giving programs that are out there. I believe the HBAR Foundation is one of them. Also, relatively newer, the Hashgraph Association is also one. They're I believe more focused on the enterprise side of the equation. But yeah, there are grants and opportunities to do that. Like I said, there's a growing DeFi ecosystem over there as well, with reward pools. I think, ultimately the network still needs several key infrastructural pieces in order to really deliver on the promise of the network. One of which would be a native Oracle service. Hashport as a platform, we're actually working on developing a native Oracle service for the ecosystem. And so, over time, we'll really look to just round out those key components that developers are looking for. Um, with Hashport, we've really tried to focus on sort of how do we, you know, in the easiest way possible, with being as secure as we can, migrate assets to and from Hedera to all of the supported networks. And so we've sort of with our validator set on Hashport, we've taken the approach of sort of emulating what the Hedera Governing Council is in terms of the nodes. So we actually have 9 validating members on Hashport, and we're actually leveraging the Hedera consensus service for those transactions. So anytime a transaction comes to Hashport, any one of the 9 validating members will sign that, and then they'll turn around and submit it to the rest of the validating parties. And then only when we reach super majority does that transaction get immutably logged on Hedera, which then triggers the minting or burning function from Hashport. And so we've also comprised the validators of from the industry, really well-known world-class organizations like the HBAR Foundation. Polygon is a validator on Hashport. Galaxy, which is a decentralized social media app from Spencer Dinwiddie in the
Yeah,
NBA.
basketball player.
Yeah, basketball player. Hex Trust, which is one of Asia's largest digital asset custodians. WorldPay from FIS, which is actually, I believe, one of the first Fortune 250 companies to ever join as a validating member for a bridge, and is actually a publicly traded company. StableNode, which is like a sister company of MakerDAO and the DAI stablecoin.
And
Animoca Brands, which
oh yeah,
yeah, Animoca
they're
is
a mega
one of
company over in Asia. And
yeah,
they're starting to dip their toes into blockchain and Web3 applications as well. All of these are validators on Hashport's bridge.
yeah. So they're
Okay.
all individual validators, much the same way that there's nodes for the Hedera network.
Mhm.
And rounding it out is Lime Chain, which is our systems integrator and build partner, and then BCW Group, which is a fintech focused venture studio.
Cool.
And between these 9 members, it's slightly different than a lot of other interops. Sometimes you get interops, at least in the past, with a lot of the compromises where it's like there were 2 out of 3 signatures required, or you don't really know who the validating partners are. We've tried to be more transparent with what we're doing and follow sort of in the same vein as what Hedera's tried to do, just to provide that level of functional trust to users migrating assets that hey, the assets that are being multi-sigged on your behalf while you've migrated between networks is via companies that it would be not in their best interest to be doing anything nefarious. So we've really tried to take that principle and practice. And also, we don't have a platform token. It's really been about interoperability at its core, and not necessarily trying to add additional bells and whistles or frivolous features and functionality that really just isn't to getting you from one network to the other, because that adds complexity. And when you add complexity, you add vectors that weren't there before. So we try and use battle tested code as much as possible. And yeah, it's just really about providing a great experience to the user, trying to be it users coming into Hedera or devs building on Hedera looking to expand their platform's reach onto all of the other supported networks and reach out to new communities and you know show what they've built. So it's really just about enabling access when it all comes down to it.
Awesome. Well, you guys are steadfast on the mission of scaling blockchain technology, DLT technology in general. Thanks for coming on, and looking forward to talking again, kind of like as we can track the growth of Hedera. It'd be really cool to just kind of like kind of follow up and see how the industry and the applications have progressed.
Absolutely, yeah, I'd love to do that anytime.
Thanks. Cheers, buddy.
Appreciate it.